Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to this morning's session on identifying and supporting victims of modern slavery. It's really great to see so many of you here this morning. I hope you've got your coffee ready and ready for a good couple of hours where we're going to go through particularly some of the support organisations out there who are helping not just construction but other organisations understand what to look for and actually how to respond when you find victims of exploitation. So most of you hopefully should have been to a school event before, so you should know how this runs. We've got a couple of hours of questions and answers, presentations from some great speakers today, from Frank from the Gangmasters Labour Abuse Authority. He's going to give you an overview of what they do and how it impacts our industry. We have Justine Carell from the Modern Slavery Helpline, who some of you probably have in your remediation and whistleblowing helpline requirements. She's going to give you an overview of her organisation and probably ask you for a bit of support as it's currently needing a bit of support going forward. We will have an opportunity to ask questions and answers to each of these, and after a break we'll be hearing again from Mark and Paul from Slave Free Alliance and Hope for Justice, who are going to talk about some real cases they've been involved in. And finally, last but not least, we'll hear from Daniel, who's working on the SCS programme on HS2, about the work they're doing off the back of campaigns like Brighter Futures. So some really, really insightful people this morning. So in terms of the session, hello and welcome. This will be recorded and I'll go through this sort of housekeeping in a moment. Most of you possibly do know me. If you don't, my name is Helen Carter. I am working for Action Sustainability and I work in the supply chain school, leading on things like the labour group, the People Matter Charter, and actually the knowledge that goes on through the school on modern slavery. So some of you may have been to some of my events before. If you haven't, welcome. I just ask you to get involved as much as possible, ask questions in the chat box, which you have the opportunity to do. And I hope you get something really useful out today. I'm pretty excited about our panel today. I'm pretty sure you will. In terms of the technical side of things, if you have got any problems with regards to getting access to any of the sound, or you've got technical issues, then there's a chat box on the right hand side. You can put a question in, and Rosie is our goddess when it comes to absolutely dealing with technical issues. She'll be able to help you through that. Alternatively, there's a bit of advice there in terms of Google Chrome, or there is a dial-in number that you can use. Although this is a webinar, not sort of like a workshop that I tend to run, questions and answers are encouraged. So what I would suggest is if you've got a question, pop it in the chat box. I will be moderating all the way through and asking questions of our speakers, and you'll have an opportunity after each speaker to ask them any particular questions. As is the norm, we will be recording this webinar and uploading it into the school, so you can watch it again if you really want to, or alternatively send it across to anybody you think might be interested, and circulate it round. So make sure that you look out for your emails, because we will be sending a link to any of the resources. And we try and make things a little interactive, so we do have polls. So please join in if you possibly can, because it's always quite interesting to hear people's opinions on what we're discussing. So as I've said, we start now at 9:30. We're due to finish around about 11:30. The reason we're here is because we are trying to upskill our industry as much as possible in how we deal with labour standards and particularly issues around exploitation, but we're linking this into our People Matter Charter. It's one of a series of events that we're running around all the different commitments within the Charter. So for those of you who've heard this bit before, when you come into the intro, go and get your coffee. But alternatively, if you haven't, I'll give you an insight into the People Matter Charter and the reason that we're particularly looking at exploitation in this industry. Then I will hand over to Frank, who'll give you an insight into the GLAA's role, Justine, who'll talk to you about the Modern Slavery Helpline. We'll let you go and get a coffee or a tea or whatever your tipple of choice is at that time of the morning. And then we'll pass over to Mark and Paul from Slave Free Alliance and Hope for Justice, and HS2 and SCSS from Daniel. I will give you a bit of an overview at the end of the roadmap that we have within the school around this particular commitment, and finish off with some questions and answers. So a big packed agenda for you this morning. So why are we here? Why did we particularly talk about this aspect? Some of you may have been to my event last week on living wage. We have a number of issues around the People Matter Charter, of which exploitation is one, and we have two commitments actually around how we deal with human rights in materials supply chains and also our labour organisations. So we have commitment number 5, which we're not going to talk about today, which is more an international context around what's going on in our materials supply chain. So your bricks, your metal, your limestone, granite, those sorts of products. But today we're going to focus very much around sort of more UK-based issues around labour exploitation on your sites. And we're going to talk to all the individuals about that. So usual poll, when it comes to People Matter, I'm going to ask you to all answer the next question, just so I've got a good idea in terms of who's represented. If you can actually talk about what type of organisation you're from today, that would be really, really useful, and I can get a good idea in terms of where your responsibility lies around exploitation in the supply chain. There's a lot of you on this morning, so we'll hopefully get some decent answers, and hopefully you can all remember how to use the buttons. Thank you. No, 61%, not bad. Okay, so let's have a look. We've got a large number of you just having a look at the scores. In the other, I'm curious as to the other bit. Subcontractors and contractors, obviously we have a huge range that we talk to within this course, so it's interesting, but nice to see that we have some clients on the call as well, which is always really useful. Okay, so the second question then, thank you. Rosie, we got the slide. Thank you. And yes, have you heard of the People Matter Charter? No, haven't heard of it. I've heard of it. Been to some events, but my organisation isn't a signatory, and I've heard of it, and my organisation is a signatory. Thank you. Oh, 66%. Now, hopefully, I'm going to start seeing that number at the bottom get a bit bigger each time, which would be really, really nice. Note, for those of you who haven't heard, sit back for the next 2 minutes because I'm going to give you an overview. Some of you have obviously heard of it, and I know that I'm having constant conversations with some of you anyway. So what I will do now is give you an explanation as to what the People Matter Charter is and why it came about. It worked off the back of the work that we've been doing in the school probably for the last 3 or 4 years around the issues of modern slavery, but actually looking at bigger issues in our industry around issues of exploitation, but also challenges that we're going to have over the next probably 4 or 5 years with regards to reductions in skills, lack of new entrants into the marketplace, and too many people leaving the other end. And in fact, as the Act has come in, as the Modern Slavery Act has come in, it's become a lot more apparent that as our industry, we are not perceived to be a nice industry to work for, totally incorrectly in a lot of instances. But there is an issue within our industry around potential exploitation. And that's not just modern slavery, that's actually issues like bullying, discrimination, 0-hour contracts, people being paid below minimum wage. When we talked about modern slavery in particularly, we've started to have much more of a conversation around modern slavery existing because there's lots of other issues that make it easier for it to thrive. So exploitation and forced labour, as we're talking about today, can thrive quite nicely when there is a culture in an industry where it's fine for people to be bullied, it's fine for us to discriminate, it's fine for us to take lots of illegal payments or hidden payments off people's wages and make them vulnerable. So the People Matter Charter came to deal with that risk in the industry, but at the same time, a more proactive approach in terms of thinking about how do we skill the next generation. A lot of you are doing amazingly good work, not just in combating this exploitation issue, but actually trying to think about how do we upskill the next generation? How do we encourage them to come in? How do we deal with the demographic of our workforce and actually make it more representative of the UK in the way we tend to operate? How do we make sure people are being paid fairly, etc., etc.? So it's about trying to deal with not only the exploitation, but also to take some of the positives that you're all doing through things like social value and put it together in what we're calling a workforce strategy. And to do that, we created 8 commitments. So for some of you on this call, you should know them all very well. For those of you who've not heard of this, the commitments are covering equality and diversity. You may be familiar with FAIR that we have in the school. So it's linked into things like the fairness, inclusion and respect policy. It's linked into skills and training to make sure that you're thinking about not just upskilling and using things like your apprenticeship levy, but thinking about how you're encouraging the next generation to come in and maybe diversify some of your skills slightly. It's about well-being, which is a big focus this year, massive focus this year, and actually is intrinsically linked into how you spot victims on site. So mental health first aiders, for example, are a good place of educating them to spot signs when you're working on construction sites. But not just that, thinking about reducing vulnerabilities, and so making sure people are being paid, they have a financial well-being as well as a mental well-being. Living wage, and just before anyone panics, we're not asking you to become a Living Wage Foundation member, although we'll talk about a roadmap later on. That's eventually where we'd like you to get to. But this is about being able to evidence that you're at least ensuring you're legal, you're paying minimum wage, you're paying national living wage where it's required, but then maybe pushing it a little bit further into your supply chain to make sure that everybody is just being paid fairly and getting a fair day's pay for the work they're doing. The 5th element is the last one in what we call the intents, and that is about material supply chain. So this is an area where personally I'm incredibly busy at the moment, starting to understand where human rights and labour standard risks exist in our materials supply chain particularly. So if you're thinking about brick imports, or you're thinking about granite, batteries for cobalt, what are we doing in terms of responsible sourcing? So that's a growth area. They're called intents, so 1 to 5 are intents. That's where we're actually asking you to make sure that A, you're legally compliant as a minimum, but actually you're then thinking about moving slowly up the journey in maturity and understanding where you need to go. And you may be an organisation that buys no materials, so actually some of it may not be relevant to you. So number 5 might not be relevant. So it's trying to take a flexible approach. The last 3, however, are applicable to everybody, and they're called requirements. So this is making sure that you understand the right to work requirements. You understand what you have to do to ensure that people are legal in this country. And this is going to become an even bigger issue probably in January, in terms of making sure that you've done everything you need to do post-Brexit and the deals are done. 7 is about due diligence, and this isn't about a statement. This is about ensuring you understand where the exploitation exists and that you're mitigating that risk as much as possible, and possibly going further than just risk mitigation. And then the final one, which is the most contentious probably, is making sure that people's employment standards are fair and that everyone is being paid effectively in the right mechanisms, whether it's PAYE, the dreaded umbrella companies, making sure things like IR35 are considered and managed effectively. So the charter is about combining all those different things into how you deal with your people. How do you manage them? What sort of systems and strategies do you have in place? In terms of the charter itself, it's voluntary, so you don't have to become a signatory, although I do know some of the partners, and I know there's 1 or 2 on the call today, are asking our supply chains to sign up, but it isn't mandatory at this present moment in time. It is free, so we're not asking you to pay anything, and in fact we're giving you so many resources to help you. It's bonkers, but it is about anybody who employs people. It applies to you. In terms of the roadmap, which I'll explain right at the very end, your level that you're going to get into the roadmap is your own personal ambition, your own personal journey. And it's about making sure that we can help you implement it, support it and promote it and embed it in each tier of the supply chain. We want to start to standardise and get better standards as we get into the supply chain. And that's the ambition of the Charter going forward. If you're interested in signing or committing, all you need to do is drop me an email, and we ask you to do 3 things: that you are committing to it, that you embed it in your own organisation, that you ask your key supply chain to embed the requirements in your own organisation, in their organisation, and maybe commit to the Charter as well. And I say key because supply chain, it's not about everybody, it's your hot potatoes, if you like, your hot topics. At the moment, the requirement is that we ask for a case study within 12 months. However, the roadmap that I'm about to show you at the end of this will become automated soon, and that will become part of the signatory requirement, so that we can start to see where you are in that journey and collect that data and get a picture of how industry is operating. Just for an overview, just to finish off, we have currently about 67 signatories, and we were hoping this year to hit 100. If we do that, it will be absolutely amazing, considering that 67 has been achieved pretty much during lockdown, which is a massive testament. And I think what's really good is we're starting to see clients sign, we're starting to see principal contractors sign, suppliers, labour agencies, subcontractors. So you'll start to see a really good breakdown of the sorts of organisations that are signing up to it. It applies to anyone. If you employ people, you should have a people strategy, and this helps you in that space. The other thing that's kind of interesting is an SME versus non-SME approach, and it roughly was about 50-50. It's split a little bit now, but fundamentally, because the roadmap is written in an output way, anyone can apply it, and you can apply your own level, your own journey. And in fact, I've had a couple of SMEs go, it just provides me with my own personal strategy. It gives me what I need to think about how I employ people. So it's not just for the big boys, it's for the smaller organisations as well, and that flexibility is built in deliberately for that. And then finally, we have a breakdown at the moment around a 50-50 split. So we have 100 odd partners, 108 I think is the latest one in the school. Currently we are looking at trying to increase that partner level a little bit, so I'm encouraging as many partners to sign as we can. But what's really heartening for me in the way that we've been implementing this is that we have just as many non-partners, our members, people who understand the importance of having a good process in place and a good strategy in place for how you deal with your people. And going on in the next few years, that's going to become more and more important. So the reason we're here in particular today is to focus on commitment number 7, and that is about processes in operation and monitoring your understanding of dealing with exploitation in your sites, in your supply chain. If you don't have to produce a statement because you don't actually earn or turn over, more than 36 million, I do strongly recommend you do that anyway if you have to have processes in place to manage the due diligence. But what we're looking for today here in particular is not what you should have in your policy, although we probably will talk about that. It's more about actually thinking that if I was to find a victim, what do I do? So there's a lot of resources in the school. A lot of you may have been on my training courses to go through due diligence. You may go through the intro. But what happens if someone is found? And I'm sure some of our speakers today are going to go into some of the stats around construction. It does exist in the UK. We are the 3rd highest sector with the numbers of reports over the last 2 years. So it's important to understand that you have to consider, if the worst happens, then what? And that's really why we're bringing the speakers in today. There are going to be events I'll promote towards the end that we're running on due diligence and an intro, but today is about how we get the victims supported, how we help them as much as we possibly can. So learn from today, hear from some amazing speakers. I'm going to shut up, so hopefully you've learned a little bit more about the charter, but please feel free to drop me an email or get in touch with the school, and they can get in touch with me if I'm having email issues. But I am more than happy to talk about the charter, and we'll send some resources out towards the end. So I'm now going to hand over to Frank, who's going to talk about what the GLAA are and what they do. So without further ado, Frank, can I hand over to you and take it away?
Thank you, Ellen, and good morning, everyone. So I'm going to give a presentation on an introduction to the GLAA, because I'm sure there are people that haven't heard of us, a bit about our role and how we combating labour exploitation. And as Ellen said in her presentation, I'll give particular focus to what resources, what support we are giving to the construction industry as we move along through the presentation. And also, as Ellen said, if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. And if you haven't got the immediate answer, then we'll definitely get back with a response. So, who are the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority? Well, we are a law enforcement and compliance agency. We are independent, and we have a board that oversees our strategic direction. But we are accountable to the Home Office. It's the Home Office that awards us our grant settlement. And each year we present an annual report and accounts to Parliament, which details the work that we've done, how we've spent that money, and what impact it's made. We also report into the Office of the Director of Labour Market Enforcement, who again oversees our strategy along with the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate and the National Minimum Wage. So just moving along. Oops, I've jumped there, haven't I?
You're right there, Frank. That's it.
Yeah, it's bit fiddly there. There we are. So what is labour exploitation? Well, it can take many forms, and at its most basic, it's where workers are denied their employment rights, which everyone working in the UK have, but for a for a significant number that is not allowed for various reasons. It could be their ignorance of their rights. It could be that they're unable to articulate them, and it could be administrative. We find sometimes companies simply don't know the rights themselves, so don't apply them to their workforce. But on a more serious trajectory, it can become much more about organised criminality, where it moves into the sphere of forced labour, human trafficking, which becomes part of modern slavery. When we were first formed, we were formed under the name the Gangmasters Licensing Authority, and our sole remit was to regulate the supply of businesses who provided workers into the fresh food, produce and supply chain. And that was on the back of the Morecambe Bay tragedy, which many of you will remember, when 23 Chinese cockle pickers perished while harvesting shellfish. And from the subsequent investigation and reports that came out, it was clear that there was widespread exploitation of workers in that industry, along with further research that showed the extent of exploitation in the agricultural sector generally. So that gave rise to the Gangmasters and Licensing Act, and with that came a new license, and that is issued to anybody that wants to supply workers into the agricultural sector, fresh food sector, and the harvesting of shellfish. And if they're supplying workers into that industry, they must hold a license, and it is ourselves that issue that license. And this licensing scheme has come up to now, well, it'll be coming up to 15 years old since it's been in operation. And I would say it's our biggest prevention asset that we've got. It's done more to bring about compliance to that sector. It's helped to regulate standards of employment standards, health and safety standards, welfare standards of workers. And it's been a real big success. That's not to say that there aren't issues still in this sector, because there are, but it is, as I say, it's one of our biggest prevention assets that we've got, and we're very proud of its work and the achievements it's had. And what we want to do is actually look to see what we can take from the best of that and share across the wider sectors of the economy, because obviously we can't license all sectors, nor would we want to, but we can learn from what has worked, and part of the success has been the engagement with businesses, because the majority of businesses we found wanted to do the right thing. They wanted to be compliant. They often found they were undercut by businesses that were rogue, who had no interest in operating in a legal, ethical way. So introducing these standards not only protects the workers, but it actually creates a level playing field in which businesses are able to compete on equal terms. And with those licenses, standards, come powers that we've got to revoke licenses should we find businesses have been non-compliant. And our decisions to take enforcement action is always proportionate. It's always understanding of the impact it may have on the workforce as well as the business. But the powers we've got can range from removing that license, so they no longer can trade in this sector, and to do so would be an offence with up to 10 years imprisonment. nor are they to even suggest that they've got a license, which we've come across many times. So the standards enshrined in law give us good powers, strong powers that we can use, but we always use them proportionately. We can now also issue labour market undertakings. These are, if you think of in terms of antisocial behaviour, these are like ASBOs, which we can impose conditions on how a business can basically behave and act. And should they fail to behave in the way that's stipulated on those undertakings, then again we can then take it a step further. So in 2017, having been established for over 10 years, we gained new powers. And these new powers really came on the back of the introduction of the Modern Slavery Act in 2015. So in 2017, these new powers allowed us as an organisation to investigate serious modern slavery offences outside of that sector of agriculture. In fact, it allows us to look at modern slavery across all sectors of the economy in England and Wales. We still don't yet have the powers for Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that is something that we do want to address, because we want to be consistent and obviously be uniform across the UK. But at the moment, those powers only relate to England and Wales. As I say, it includes serious modern slavery offences. So intelligence that comes in is graded, it's assessed, and I'll come on to that shortly. But it's got to meet the threshold of the Modern Slavery Act, where we can introduce those powers, which are basically police-style powers. They come under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, the PACE powers. And we've got a specially trained group of operational staff called Labour Abuse Prevention Officers, who are trained to use those powers, and obviously they do, and secure following investigations, convictions for modern slavery offences. We work independently and in partnership. We often lead investigations, but we are a relatively small organisation, really, given that we've got this national remit. Our workforce in total is just 125. Half of those are what I would call field staff. They work operationally across the UK. They're home workers. They're based all throughout England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, both for the licensing scheme, which is UK-wide, and as I said, the investigation of modern slavery offences, which is restricted to just England and Wales. So, as I mentioned, we are an intelligence-led organisation, and by that, what I mean is all of the intelligence that comes in from a variety of sources. It can come in from businesses, it can come in from members of the public, from all the law enforcement agencies. All of that information is graded, assessed and prioritised, and really informs how we open up investigations, how we design and implement strategic priorities for the organisation. And basically, it governs how we work. And when we say intelligence, as this slide shows, we're not just talking about information, because we get lots of information, and often that information just doesn't add up to any intelligence. Simply put, intelligence is information that we can actually use, that we can actually help build an understanding of what is happening, obviously out across industry throughout the UK. And it is the foundation of how we operate and how we open up investigations. What I'd also say about intelligence is how important it is for you guys, for your businesses. I'll jump to another one there, sorry. Let's have a look. Right, there we go. What we want to do with this intelligence is actually turn it around and reflect it back to yourselves, so you can help design your own strategy and risk assessment of how you can manage that risk based on what information, what intelligence we're giving you. So, for example, we've just updated our industry profiles, and you'll find these on our website. And in fact, I've sent Ellen and Rosie the links, so they will go out to you after this presentation. But these profiles are basically some headline figures around different sectors, different high-risk sectors that we've got. So we've got one for construction, and that will give you a victim profile. So the most common profiles of victims of exploitation in the construction industry, some of the hotspot locations where exploitation is happening, the methodology that's being used to exploit, and some horizon scanning. So what is coming over the hill that you might need to consider in terms of your risk assessments. And the feedback we get is that these are really useful because, as I say, it can help how you apply your due diligence. You've got obviously some data there that can help inform that due diligence, and now then you manage that risk within your business and within your supply chains. Another tool that we've got now is the construction protocol, and a protocol really is it's a pledge. We wanted it to use it as a platform to engage again some of the high risk sectors. So at the moment we've got 4 protocols in existence, 3 are live, and that's for construction, textiles, and suppliers and retailers in the food and drink industry. And we've also got one for the hospitality sector, although that's yet to be launched, and that's basically down to the current crisis in that sector due to COVID. But for the construction protocol that is live, we've got over 200 signatories, which has been a fantastic response from the industry. And what it did highlight is just how much appetite there is to work with the GLAA to really extend that knowledge, that understanding of how they can work in partnership to protect vulnerable workers. The construction protocol is also about sharing information, and again, that's that call really that information, if it becomes intelligence, means we can actually do something with it for your benefit. We do talk about in the protocol that we're not there to sensationalize or to suddenly pounce on individuals. We want to work with you in a way that's sensitive, that we're mindful of the impact that discovering labour exploitation on your site can have for your reputation. So we do understand those, and we do work, as I say, in mindful of that. Although being a member of the protocol in no way protects you from investigations if those investigations need to be undertaken, but it does mean we understand, as I say, that it is a sensitive issue, and we've got to be mindful of that. And that issue there about committing to raise awareness within the supply chains. We know that the construction industry has a very long and often complex supply chains, and whilst your tiers 1 and 2, you may have a full understanding and control over, as you go into further tiers, it can get very uncertain and very difficult then to how do you exert some influence and control over those supply chains when it becomes, as I say, as convoluted and as complex as they can be, especially on some major infrastructure projects where the risk of exploitation is far greater, particularly when they are looking for a huge supply of workers, and a lot of those workers are coming from outside the UK. So just moving on. And already from the construction protocol, some of the members worked together with my predecessor and produced this construction protocol induction pack. And that induction pack is available for all to use as you see fit. It's got lots of posters, videos, there's leaflets, and it's really just to help you introduce the subject of exploitation to your workforce and take some key messages in a way that we hope you find is relevant to your sector and as I say, to your workers. So I always leave with sort of 5 things that you can do almost immediately to help protect your organisation and your workers and prevent labour exploitation. We often get people that, as I say, are really keen to make a start, but sometimes not sure where that starting line should take place. I'm just going to sip of water. I'm drying a bit. It's better. So the first thing and the easiest thing to do is, if you witness labour exploitation, if somebody reports labour exploitation to one of your sites, report it. Doesn't matter what information you've got at hand. Obviously, the more the better, but at the very least, report it into our telephone hotline or via email. And we are looking at exploitation, and as I say, it is really about the content of what you can provide. So capturing as much details, dates, times, if minor things, even such as if there's a car involved, did you take the number plate, nationality of workers, appearance of workers, all the things that you could think might not be important, but actually gives us a much better and sharper picture of what you're telling us. And it may be that you don't give us everything, but equally it might give us information that we can collaborate with, further information that we've received elsewhere. So if you don't report it to us, there are certainly other ways you can report it. And there's some speakers coming after me that can talk more about their role. But just to say, obviously, if it is an emergency, then it's always the 999 call if it's life-threatening or somebody's in danger of serious harm. So let's move this down a bit. So I mentioned the profiles. We've got lots of resources. You can learn about labour exploitation and modern slavery on our website. They're all freely available to download. We've got a worker rights leaflet that's available in 19 languages, which again I've given to Ellen and Rosie to send out the link to that on our website. We did some work with the GLAA initiative, and there is some learning resources that they've done on there that are really useful. So if anybody has got this as a particular focus of their role, their responsibility, then it may be good to check them out. I'll just quickly talk about the last bullet point there. We are designing a qualification on preventing labour exploitation and understanding your employment rights. This will be aimed at workers. The first qualification is going to be a level 1, which is a very basic introduction, and it's going to be aimed at those workers that have either got no or very limited understanding of employment rights, and that could be because they've just come to the UK, they're not aware of the UK employment law, but it could be that workers, students starting out in college who are studying for a qualification in construction, hospitality, health and social care, anywhere where there's a risk of exploitation within that sector, then those students will be encouraged to take that qualification. And it's really about getting them work ready. It's about getting them ready for the environment that they'll be working in, to give them more confidence and to make them a better and more confident employee, because these workers are tomorrow's workforce. So if they get that grounding, that understanding of labour exploitation, employment rights, they can take that through with their career as it progresses, and we hope then that the understanding becomes so embedded that it does start to change the way we all think about and apply measures to reduce and design out exploitative practices from the outset. And that is the one of the most strongest prevention tools that we can use. So as I mentioned, we've got those profiles which are available. We've got some leaflets, and again, some very easy to understand leaflets about what to do, what the signs of exploitation, and how to engage and how to report, all available on our website. One of our most popular booklets is this Spotting the Signs, which again, it spots the signs but also defines some of the terminology that's used often in modern slavery, and some do's and don'ts when assisting victims, and what you can do, which again will be discussed in more detail following my presentation. So just moving along. There's that worker rights leaflet I mentioned, covers all of the main employment rights, and again, it's available in all those different languages. You can sign up to the GLAA Construction Protocol, and we'd welcome you to sign up. What I would say is first have an internal discussion, talk to your senior management team, because signing up is a big commitment. It's a big public commitment, and you want to be sure that you've got the backing and the support of your senior management team before signing it. I'm more than happy to have a chat with anybody that is interested in becoming a signatory, and we can talk about the ways that you can do that. A very simple way, but again, it shows a commitment from the industry and the businesses concerned. You can also sign up to our partnership bulletin that goes out quarterly. The November one has just come out, so actually I could send Rosie the link to that again, so you can see some of the work that's been done across all sectors that the GLAA are undertaking, and some of the best practice that we're coming across. We've just launched our own program of webinars, so look out for that soon. We'll be publishing those. The first one we had last month was in the aimed at the construction industry, and that was themed around intelligence, and we had just under shy of 100 delegates attending that, which again was a fantastic response for our first webinar. By all means, please support us on social media. We have a lot of engagement on social media. It's a good point of reach, particularly with people who are often hard to reach in more conventional ways. We did a very successful campaign last year with Crime Stoppers using Facebook, in which we targeted Romanian nationals who were thinking of coming to UK to work in the construction industry, and were often duped by fake adverts on Facebook. So we ran a campaign on Facebook which invited them to click onto our page, and once they did come onto our page, there were messages in both Romanian and in English about the employment rights and who to contact should they get into any trouble when they arrive in the UK and they find the work that was planned isn't what they expected. That campaign, although it only ran for a few weeks, actually generated up to 1 million hits for us, and it just showed how effective it can be, where we actually go, to use the term, upstream to really the source of where people need that information, need that knowledge before they even set foot in the UK, so as they don't make the mistakes that they can make when they've arrived, and for some it can be too late. Right, I think that's me done. I'd like to hand back to Helen, and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Frank. Really, really interesting, and a really good insight into the role that the GLAA plays, and a mass of resources. Most of the questions, unfortunately, Frank, seem to be about some of the links that you've given out don't seem to work on web pages. So what we'll do for the guys, I've made a list of all the different documentation that you've talked about. So links to the qualifications, links to the induction pack, all that sort of stuff. We do have some of them duplicated in school. and I'll actually talk to you about how the induction's been embedded into the air model that we created for sites at the end. But I'll liaise with Frank, and we'll get all of the links checked and all the documentation in the circulation email to everybody. So thank you for that. That seemed to be most of the questions, Frank, in terms of that. So what I'm going to do is probably go on to the to Justine's in a second. There is a question about Stronger Together, about, I think that was linked to my bit around People Matter Charter. Hold on to that question. I've noted it, and I will be talking about that a little bit later on as well. So I'm not ignoring that question. So a big thank you from me, from Frank. He's sticking around. So as you hear from other people towards the end, we'll have a big sort of mop-up Q&A session. But what I will now do is hand over to Justine, who's going to talk to you particularly around the role of the Modern Slavery Helpline, and the massive, brilliant work that they do in this space. So without further ado, to yourself, Justine.
Thank you very much, Helen, and good morning to everybody. So I'm Justine Currell. I'm a director for the Modern Slavery charity Unseen, and I'm also Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Bedfordshire. I have had a career primarily in the civil service, but moved across to Unseen in 2016. And prior to joining Unseen, I was the Senior Policy Advisor at the Home Office and had the privilege of drafting the Modern Slavery Act, and worked with many businesses on looking at the legislation that was put in 2015, and also subsequently how businesses can improve their response to modern slavery. So before I move on, I've just got a very short video. So Rosie, would you be able to just play the very short video first, please?
Can your business spot the signs of modern slavery? Basic checks can pick up warning signs. Basic worker checks can tell you whether multiple workers live at the same address, use the same bank account, or share a phone number. Shared personal details like these can point to exploitation. Are all workers well and okay, or do you have concerns? Signs of injury or malnourishment can indicate abuse from an exploiter. An unkempt appearance can be caused by unsanitary living conditions. A person wearing the same clothes every day may have very few possessions. Workers who appear frightened, sad, or anxious may be victims of exploitation. Do workers ever talk to anyone, or does someone always speak on their behalf? Do workers have freedom of movement, or do they always travel with someone else? Do they work excessive hours without days off? Do they have the right equipment to do the job safely? If you spot something suspicious, report it to the appropriate role holder. Do not discuss anything where workers can hear you. Do not approach anyone or take matters further without assistance. You may put victims or even yourself at risk. For independent help and advice, phone the Modern Slavery Helpline on 08000 121 700. Don't ignore your suspicions. Do the right thing. Remember, help. Hear it or see it, engage with it, learn from it, prevent it.
Great. So that video is just a short clip from some of our training materials, which we're more than happy to share with you if that's helpful. But first off, I just wanted to kind of go back to what we're talking about today. So we often hear people saying, I don't really understand what modern slavery is. It doesn't really affect me. Doesn't really affect my business because we're legitimate. Well, modern slavery really is just the abuse and exploitation of one person over another for profit, with very little chance of prosecution for the perpetrators, unfortunately, but quite terrible and horrendous human rights outcomes for the victims. And we're a modern slavery charity, so we don't deal just with labour exploitation, and I'll come on to some of that in a moment. But I just want to kind of put that out there, because I think a lot of people think that this is migrant workers, this is people that have come from abroad, but we actually do see a huge number of UK nationals caught up in exploitation of all different types. And like I said, I'll come on to that in a moment. So just in terms of what we do as an organisation, we do a number of key things. We provide direct survivor support services to men and women. So we've got safe houses, and we provide reintegration and outreach support, most of that through the government's funded national referral mechanism and victim care contract. So we work with the Salvation Army and a number of other subcontractors to provide that support. We also equip others. So a large proportion of what we do is training local authorities, the NHS, and also policing, and bringing to life what we see on the helpline and how those statutory agencies can help and support potential victims. But we also now spend a lot of our time working with businesses around training, and we've got specific e-learning content bespoke to each sector, which is based on a lot of the case studies and a lot of the information that we get through from the UK Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline. And that kind of really brings it to life for people. And then the third thing we do is we provide we look at systemic change. So that's really working with the UK government, and having had a background in working with ministers, that's always helpful. But we also work internationally on that. So we provided advice and guidance to the Australian government. I've been to New Zealand and provided support to the New Zealand government on 2 occasions. Been over to the US and spoke to the federal government, and also California, where the first legislation was introduced, as well as Canada and a number of EU countries. So we use a lot of what we do to try and influence how others are taking this issue seriously, both in the UK and overseas. And then importantly, since 2016, October, I set up the UK-wide Modern Slavery Helpline. Earlier this year, we renamed it the Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline. And the reason for that is because a large proportion of what we see is very much focused around labour abuse. So not something that we would term modern slavery. It's not at the high end, but it's also still quite significant, and actually can have quite detrimental consequences for the workers who are caught up in this. So I think we always need to remember that when we're talking about labour abuse and issues with workers, that actually there is that spectrum. So we talk about poor working practices that tip into labour abuse, and labour abuse can be anything like non-payment of minimum wage and non-payment of holiday, not getting days off that people want, and then tipping really into modern slavery, which we would see as being that controlling element, the feeling like you're forced to work, you're not able to leave, you might have tied accommodation, you might be in debt bondage. So you might have paid somebody to get that job, which is illegal in the UK, or you might have paid to travel to the UK, and then ultimately you are in a situation, you are debt bonded, and you are forced to pay off that debt by working for somebody else. And unfortunately, what we generally see happen is that the debt just increases because more and more debt is placed on that individual, because they're in tied accommodation, they've got tied transport to and from work, they will have to pay a fine if they do something that they shouldn't, or if they have a day off. So we really do see this cycle where people are just not able to get off that treadmill. They just keep running faster and faster. But really, in terms of the UK-wide Modern Slavery Helpline, as I said, we've been set up just over 4 years now, and we take all calls related to all types of exploitation. So that's 4 different types in the UK: sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation, domestic servitude, and forced labour. And as I said, forced labour is the most prevalent that we see. About 52% of all of our calls related to modern slavery will be about a worker or somebody in a situation of work. And the third highest sector that we get reports on is the construction sector. And so this is why, we're working with lots of different businesses to try and raise that awareness and make sure that people know and understand not only what modern slavery is and how labour abuse fits into that, but also what businesses can do to help mitigate, to apply appropriate due diligence, and then to remediate effectively. And we help and support businesses to do that. The helpline is not anonymous. And it's very important that we're not anonymous, because we need to be able to take information from people that will allow us to determine the best course of action for them. However, people can remain anonymous if they want to. So we get calls from a lot of different avenues. Most of our calls primarily will be from members of the public. So they will be reporting situations that they've seen in their high street. They might have gone into a car wash and noticed something wrong. They might have driven past a farm. Or they could have had somebody working on their house and be concerned about the workers' welfare. So we do a lot of work with the public and trying to raise general awareness. But we also take calls from statutory agencies. So it might be a surprise to you to learn that a lot of police colleagues don't actually know what to do or how to spot the signs of modern slavery. We've got some real pockets of expertise across the country, but if you think of 135,000, 140,000 officers, it's very difficult for them when they're thinking about all of the other types of crimes and issues that they need to deal with, that they will need to think about modern slavery and think about that in a different context. So we do a lot of work with the police, as well as local authority safeguarding teams and NHS, who are on the front line, and we'll have people turning up to places like GP surgeries or hospitals and really want that help and support to understand what they need to do. In terms of how we work 24/7, 365 days a year. We have fully trained specialist teams who have 4 weeks of intensive training and then ongoing training, so they can talk to an officer about the tools that are available, asset seizure, slave and trafficking risk and prevention orders. They can talk to businesses about somebody who might have spotted an issue with a supplier, or we can talk to a member of the public who might want to report a suspicious circumstance. We do have translation services, and we have that in real time. So we have over 200 languages available. So we can get somebody in the moment onto a call talking to somebody whose first language is not English. And that's been absolutely invaluable. It's an expensive service, but it's a service that really does benefit what we do. And then calls from potential victims, businesses, public and statutory agencies help and inform what we do over time. So gives us the opportunity to provide data and trend analysis to many of the people that we work with. So just to give you a bit of a sense of what we do and how many calls and contacts we get. So if you look at 2019 as an example, we had over 9,200 contacts. 7,073 of those were calls. 2,176 were online reports, and we also got 70 app submissions. Unseen has a free app that many of the businesses that we work with encourage their own organisation, but also their suppliers and down the supply chain with workers to have. And that gives you some basic signs to spot, some indicators for the different types of exploitation, lots of different sectors included there. And you can also report directly from the app, and that goes straight into our secure system at the helpline. Those calls and contacts indicated 4,739 potential victims, and they were from 85 different nationalities. And if you look at that in terms of the translation services provided, you can see why that is so key. But actually, UK nationals are in the top 5. They are the top nationality for children because of the county lines phenomena, where gangs are getting young people to move drugs to and from different towns and cities, not so much from a forced labour perspective, but also a lot of children involved in sexual exploitation and gangs and grooming as well. 2,338 referrals to police and safeguarding. That was a referral to every single police force in the UK. And we are the biggest third-party referrer into the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority. And in 2019, we worked directly, had many more conversations with businesses, but worked directly with businesses either to provide awareness raising, training, support around policies, practices and procedures, but also then remediation as well. And the little picture on the right hand side of the screen there is the report that we put out in October, which looked at the first 6 months of the pandemic and how things had changed over the 6 months. So you can find that on www.modernslaveryhelpline.org. But that just gives you a sense of where we've seen things moving. And we saw an increase in agriculture because of the demand and increased demand around food. But we also saw a slight increase in what we thought we would in terms of construction situations as well. And we think that primarily is because construction was back up and running fairly quickly after the total lockdown in March and April. And happy to answer any questions on that as we move through. But then if you look at the other information that we put out, again, this is on the Modern Slavery Helpline, the executive summary for 2019. Again, you can see there we got 106 construction cases with 419 potential victims indicated. Labour exploitation, we had 886 labour exploitation cases, but we had 1,112 labour abuse cases. So if you think about that in the grand scheme of things, that's actually pretty significant. So then just thinking, just want to kind of take this slightly wider in terms of forced labour and the typical sectors that we see. Obviously, construction is up there, but we also see agriculture, which is linked actually to factories, hospitality and logistics. So if you think about the food production chain, you know, from farm into food processing, into packaging, through logistics and out to supermarkets and others, there is a real chain and there are different sectors that are involved in that. We're seeing a big increase in logistics, a lot of delivery drivers, a lot of people in warehouses reporting situations where they're being abused and exploited. Obviously, I'm sure all of you have heard of the situation in Leicester at the moment, and which we've known about for several years, where we think a lot of that, is labour abuse and lots of underlying dynamics that are occurring there. But again, we're linked in with a lot of the partners in Leicester to try and help and support and make sure that we've got a single call to action, which is the helpline that's 24/7 that can help anybody that has an issue around abuse or exploitation. Technology is a key one, I'm sure. I don't need to remind anybody of the source minerals that go into making lots of the iPhones and tablets that we use every day in our working lives, but also in our home lives. Cleaning is also a key one. We see a lot of calls around cleaning. Many businesses will have cleaners if they've got offices, and they'll subcontract it and give that to the lowest common denominator, which is often profit. And therefore we see lots of people being put into situations where they're cleaning, doing lots of different jobs, not getting paid minimum wage, and really suffering as a result of that. And then the other one that we see around waste management. So we do see that's low paid, low skilled work, and people are fairly transient in terms of the workforce. So again, we see lots of issues there. And then the wider issue around hospitality, hotels, takeaways, restaurants, it happens in all these different types of sectors. So just to give you a very quick sense, I won't labour on this point, but a lot of people ask me what happens when I make a call to the Modern Slavery Helpline. Well, when you call the helpline, you'll speak to an advisor, they'll get the gist of what you're talking about, and then they will ask you a series of questions that will help to inform what's happening. And often we get calls that are not related to the type of exploitation that we deal with. So we might get somebody who is in a situation where there's potential female genital mutilation or honour-based violence. We've had calls around terrorism. We have a lot of calls around domestic violence, and that can sometimes tip into modern slavery, depending on the circumstances. But we'll take all that information in. We'll provide the level of assurance that the callers need. We work on consent. If people don't want to give us their information, they don't have to. If a victim is in a situation where it's quite bad, but they don't want anybody else to know about it, including the police, then we won't tell anybody. And we think this is really, really important, because if you tell somebody and somebody goes knocking on a door or trying to bash down doors and that person's not ready, and you're being questioned in front of the exploiter, then the chances are you're not going to admit what's happening to you. And you certainly don't want to be in a situation where you are working for somebody who's threatening your family and saying, if you tell anybody else, I will come after you and I'll come after your family. So we always work at the pace of the individual, and we always make sure we get that information and that we loop in people as and when that's required. Obviously, there are two exemptions to that. If there's a young person in a situation being exploited, then we say right up front, if this is about a child, then I'm afraid we have to tell the authorities, because we have a duty of care to somebody under 18. Or if somebody's literally just about to get physically attacked, then we would say either phone the police yourself, or we will do it and try and keep you on the line. So they're the two areas where we would waive that anonymity. But a lot of what we do is we actually take that information in. We've got a secure platform. We work with businesses. We've got a helpline business portal. So as calls come in, with our partners, we share situational information. So we can say, this has been reported to us. It's on this farm, it's on this construction site, it's in this location, but we won't give details of who reported that or the victim information. So obviously, because of GDPR requirements, we're not allowed to do that. But we also provide trend analysis and data to the UK government, to the devolved administrations, to policing. That's both frontline policing, but also police and crime commissioners, border force, National Crime Agency. We're linked in with all of the statutory partners as well as the GLAA to make sure that that information gets to the right people and something can be done about it. And then I just want to talk very briefly about why businesses should care. We're all on the call today because we're a representative of our own organisations, but we can't forget that we're also members of the public and we're also consumers. So we all have several different hats when we're thinking about modern slavery and how what we do and the decisions we make could affect somebody else's life. But businesses have a moral obligation. None of us want to make a decision in our professional capacities that could impact on somebody being in a situation of abuse or exploitation. And that's the reality of what we're talking about. Yes, there is a financial impact and a risk to profit if you don't do the right thing. Real risk to reputation, and we've seen that where, for example, common knowledge, Boohoo lost something like, £1 billion off their share prices overnight because people don't want to associate with businesses that don't do the right thing. Aside from the fact that there is a legal obligation, so Section 54 of the Modern Slavery Act requires any business that's doing business or carrying on part of a business in the UK, providing goods and services over 36 million, to report each year on what they're doing. And that in itself is just a bit of paper, really, but it should be a clear indicator that there's a lot of activity happening beneath. And this is where we want to help and support businesses to do the right thing. And we often talk about name and fame, not name and shame, because we don't want to put businesses in a bad light. We want to help businesses, even those who are struggling, to do the right thing, and taking small steps can really help to do that. Investor assurance is absolutely key now. More and more we're working with a number of investment companies, and they're increasingly seeking assurance from businesses. And this comes back to Helen's point around, even if you're not over 36 million, if you are bidding for work for anybody who is over 36 million, if you're bidding into the government, they will want to know what you are doing to tackle the issue. So having a statement, having clear policies and practices is absolutely key. And then the final issue there around attracting talent. More Gen Zs, millennials are looking and seeking work with people who are wanting to do the right thing. So they're looking for businesses who have sustainability at their core, not just environmental and climate, but also people issues as well. And there's just some facts around that to give you a bit of sense of what we're talking about. So just in terms of practicalities of preventing and dealing with worker exploitation, clearly one of the biggest elements is about raising awareness. We provide lunch and learn sessions and training and e-learning, focus days, board level engagement, because the real need for everybody to understand it, but maybe at different levels. And that's why working with a procurement team or an HR team or managers out on sites or those who deal with recruitment or those who deal with third-party supplier engagement, it's absolutely key that everybody understands it from the perspective within which they're working. And then assessing current policies and practices and procedures, supplier codes, escalation processes, really, really key that we understand how we're actually trying to mitigate the risk of modern slavery, not only within our organisations, and that's something that we should do, because the legislation states your own organisation and your supply chains. So people forget that they've got hospitality and forget that they've got cleaning or transportation contracts themselves, and actually start thinking much more about the supply chain. But we need to think about this in the round. And then it's about strengthening your approach, working with suppliers, working internally, regularly reviewing progress, and implementing effective policies, including escalation, but also thinking about this, if anybody has regular audits, what are we doing? Are we just looking at those audits and taking for granted that somebody's just signing those off, or actually we understanding why issues of non-conformance around audits and other interventions are there, what we can do to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And then effective remediation is absolutely key. Really working with and understanding workers through full-on engagement, taking responsibility as somebody at the top of the chain, and not just assuming that everybody else is doing their part. It's actually helping and supporting others that you're working with to do that. Learning lessons, always moving forward, and then working collaboratively. And I've put two key things for me there. Ongoing due diligence throughout the whole process. If you apply due diligence once you have recruited a third party or subcontractor, then it's too late. You need that due diligence pre, during and post, and then ongoing conversations. Otherwise, at any point in time, that risk could hit you. And it's not if, it's when. These risks are all around us, and the exploiters are looking to infiltrate supply chains. And we work with a number of big recruitment agencies who supply into some of the big sectors that we deal with, and they see it consistently. So it's really important. And then just in terms of continuous improvement, really making sure that we're not just tick box exercise. And the reason you'll probably notice that I haven't said compliance. I'm not so keen on the word compliance. Understand that we have to do it. Are we compliant with the legislation? Are we compliant with the law? But if we want to look at this through the lens of continuous improvement, we'll never stand still. We'll never say we've put out our next statement and we'll worry about it in 8 months' time when we have to start thinking about the next statement. So that's really key for me. Just quickly, some signs of modern slavery, both from an individual perspective, but also from an organisational perspective. If you go on anybody's website, you'll see key signs of modern slavery, and there's probably about 100, 120. But for me, they boil down to these 5. Behaviour. Is someone behaving oddly? Do they not want to make eye contact with you? Do they not speak for themselves? Appearance. Do they seem malnourished? Are in the same clothes every day? Do they look unkempt? Movements and restrictions. Are there any movement or restrictions placed on their movement? Are they bussed to and from? Do they look like somebody's overbearing, so the treatment by others? And then the other one that we see is accommodation. So either dilapidated accommodation or houses of multiple occupation where there are far too many people, and sometimes they cycle through the beds. So they take it in shifts to sleep and then to go to work. So we need to really think about that. One of the guys we dealt with about 18 months ago was actually living on a site in a metal container that was working for the factory and was in the car park, and a member of public happened to spot them. But that's just one of many cases that we deal with on a daily basis and that we have to get a response back to. And then key signs of modern slavery around organisations. If somebody should have a statement but they don't, then we should be questioning why. Even 5 years on from when the Act received royal assent, we still know of about 3,500 businesses that legally are required to provide or produce a statement year on year, but have not yet done so. Many more of the other 16,000 will have produced a statement that is insufficient or is not compliant with the law. So either it doesn't have it signed by the board or approved by a director, or it's not published on the website, but there'll be some reason why that is not compliant. You know, if somebody has a limited understanding, then again, you should be asking more questions, because it might be that they just don't know and they need a bit of help and support. Pricing, if somebody is giving you the best price possible and it's way below what anybody else can offer, you have to start questioning why, how are they doing that? What are the workers getting? Are they being treated appropriately? Lack of policies, procedures and checks. If people don't have the right policies or procedures in place, again, asking that question, really, really important. Health and safety is also key, because if people are skirting and cutting corners on health and safety, what other corners are they cutting? If they don't really care about health and safety of workers, then they won't care about how they treat them in other areas. If they've got no risk management strategies, and again, we should be asking this, you know, through either supplier codes of conduct, through supplier questionnaires, but really getting to understand how people can apply their risk management and mitigation strategies. And then if they've got a general unwillingness to engage, again, that should raise a red flag, and we should have more conversations with them and trying to understand exactly what it is that they're doing. Right. Oh. Hello. Sorry, I lost you for a moment then. Okay, so just dealing with potential victims. So I just wanted to kind of finish off on a couple of points. For me, language is key. We do not and never have talked about rescuing victims. And I think this is really important, because many of the people that we talk to will not associate themselves with modern slavery or relate to being a victim. I'm not a victim. This is better than I could get at home. Doesn't make it right. Some people will not thank you for going in without their consent and pulling them out of the situation, because you actually sometimes, without meaning to, put them in a worse situation, because there might not be any job opportunities for them, especially if they don't have regularized status here. That's one of the biggest concerns that we see, and many of the barriers will be around not understanding worker rights, not having access to help, information and support, and not understanding because English is not their first language. We often see Stockholm Syndrome being really key to many of the victims that we deal with. So that's where people actually believe that the only person that really cares about them is the person who's exploiting them. And so trying to remove them from that situation is difficult. Many of them, once they're out of the situation, will just go straight back, because for some time it's all they know. We've seen people in situations, not just for a few days, few weeks, but months and years. And it has a real impact. You know, that they're dealing with trauma. They have the psychological impact of that for the rest of their lives. They may be confused or unable to explain their situation. So if you ask them, you know, where do you live? They might not know necessarily. They'll have an idea, or they'll ask somebody else. And sometimes those are indicators that will make you think, hang on, there's something else might be happening. And for me, I think it's really key not to rush in. We can all think we're martyrs and go in and rush in and help, but actually understanding the situation, getting support. You can get support from the Modern Slavery Helpline. I think it's really key, because our motto is putting the victim at the heart of what we do. So we always put the individual first. We always try and understand what they want, even if it's a dire situation that we think surely you wouldn't put up with that. We're not in that situation. We don't understand what the implications are. And we have been involved in cases where, for example, a young woman was in one of our safe houses and had made the mistake of phoning her sister. The exploiters were already in touch with the sister, threatened her. They told her where she was, and the police stopped them on the way to the safe house. And that's just one example of why it's really, really crucial that you get the help and support to deal with situations and to deal with people who are very, very scared and don't want to raise the flag in terms of their situation. So just finally, as businesses and as individuals, we need to be aware. We really do need to own the problem. This is not something else that somebody else should be sorting out. It's a problem for all of us, for society. We should be thinking in the 21st century, how can we be dealing with so many people that are abused and exploited? Building relationships and talking regularly is absolutely key. Asking questions and seeking assurance of those that you do work with, or if you've got somebody coming around to offer you work at home, really, really key that you ask those questions. Sometimes doing nothing initially is the right thing to do. Assess, reflect, get help and advice, then take action, knowing that what you're doing and the implications that will have. Applying reasonable pressure is absolutely the right thing to do. Looking at your contract requirements and what you're expecting of others and what they can expect of you, I think, is really important. Not relying on one approach, but definitely focusing on continuous improvement. So that's the end of my presentation. I just want to say thank you for everybody for listening to me. If you want any further conversation, help, advice, support, I've got some details on that final slide for you. But thank you very much, Helen, for inviting me this morning. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Justine. There's been a huge range of questions, actually some that came in a little bit later after Frank had finished his. I'm very, very, very conscious of time. We've got two other presenters to also hear from. And I'm going to scrap what I was going to do at the end, because I think it's important we hear from them. So if you can hold your horses with the questions, I'm going to do a big question mop-up session towards the end. Although one burning question was, do you mind if you can share the video and everybody can get that and circulate that round, because it seemed to hit quite a big nail on the head with a lot of people, and well to the school as well. Yeah,
definitely.
Brilliant. Okay, so I know that we promised you a break, but we literally have 25 minutes left, or sorry, 35 minutes left to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight into the next section, where I am going to introduce Paul and Mark. I'm going to give you guys 15 minutes, so you can have to keep your timers on, guys, because I do need to make sure that Daniel's got some time to chat as well. But I do want to introduce these guys in terms of the work that they do as well. Very impressive around helping victims. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mark and Paul. You there, Paul? Got you.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, here. I'll let Mark go first. Okay. Thanks, Helen. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Stanton. I'm one of the directors at Slave Free Alliance, and I'll talk a lot more about what Slave Free Alliance does very shortly. So I'll hand over to Paul for the time being.
Hi, I'm Paul McAnulty. So I'm the UK and Europe Programme Director for Hope for Justice. Been in post for about 2 months now. Prior to that, spent 13 years in law enforcement investigating serious organised crime, and spent the last 3 years in the recruitment industry trying to identify and prevent victims of slavery and try to implement best practice within large-scale recruitment agencies in the UK, which primarily involve driving around the country in a beat-up Hyundai, scooping victims up and trying to get them to identify, trying to get them to engage with the NRM, and then trying to look at what's gone wrong and how we can prevent it from happening again, which resulted in the space of 3 years, we scooped up 160 victims in not just in sort of backstreet low scale industries, but in the sort of organizations you shop at quite regularly. So we'll go through some case studies later. I won't dwell on the point too much. So we were founded in 2008 by our CEO, Ben Cooley, and over the course of the last 12 years have expanded to a point now where we operate in 10 different countries at 32 locations. These are the locations now. Sorry if I am whistling through this at pace. We are a little bit short of time, so I won't labour the point of what exploitation is, but if you want any more details from me, our contact details at the end of the presentation. So these are the geographies where we currently operate. What we do in one particular area is a lot different from what we do in other parts of the world. Naturally, it's not a one-size-fits-all. So we have lighthouses and rescue child victims of trafficking in the global south. And then here in the UK, we have like 4 or 5 main areas that we operate on. So I'll go into more detail on them in a sec. So what is the scale of the problem? So we've already heard some statistics thrown around, but here, so globally, there is estimated to be 40.3 million people trapped in slavery today. And to give you some idea of context, the current population of England is 55 million. So that gives you an idea of the scale of the issue. In the UK alone, there are 136,000 people thought to be trapped in slavery. Again, wherever you're from in the UK, I can give you some context. That's the population of Preston, or the population of Norwich, or the population of Rochdale. You know, wherever you're from, pick a town. These are quite serious figures. It is endemic. It is in most industries, and it is in most towns. If you go looking for it, invariably you will find it. So again, there's a slide here about the different types of criminality and what criminals do to exploit people. I won't labour the point because I know that Frank and Justine have covered this off pretty robustly. So if you don't want any more information from me, more than happy to provide it. So this just goes through how in the 21st century do we still have 136 people in the UK trapped in labour exploitation and other forms of slavery. And I think it's been touched upon earlier, but it's our purchasing practices, it's our business practices, it's how we outsource large-scale labour to recruitment agencies, and it's how we have a domestic population of economically inactive people who no longer want to do minimum wage work. So that's constantly outsourced to different nationalities who've joined the Schengen area. Before you know it, countries with low comparative wealth, so Romania, for example, where people earn a quarter of what we earn in the UK, that push-pull, that driving factor is easy then for traffickers to approach people who are unemployed, vulnerable through learning disabilities or low levels of education, or just want a better life for themselves and their families, and then exploit that work ethic and put them to work as slaves here in the UK. It's a model we see quite frequently. So here in the UK, we've tried to divide our efforts up, and we've tried to look at a victim and a survivor's journey and look at it holistically and say, look, where are the pinch points for intervention? What can we do to make a difference? So we try to prevent slavery from happening in the first place. We do that by offering training, awareness raising sessions, educational sessions to the most at-risk and vulnerable communities. We have outreach, targeted outreach and community engagement hubs whose job it is to go out there and proactively identify victims. First responders are doing an incredible job, as they said, responding to intelligence that's coming in. But in terms of actually going out there and trying to proactively identify victims, there's a lot more to be done, because it's just the volume of it. If you do go looking for this issue, you're sure to find it. When we do identify victims, we give them that sort of first step of emotional support. We give them practical advice. We debunk a lot of myths around what the NRM is, around police engagement, GLAA engagement, because a lot of these people will have been sort of manipulated by the traffickers to have a distrust of authority. So a disproportionately high number of labour exploitation victims declined an NRM referral, but it's because they misunderstand the NRM to begin with. So we do a lot of debunking myths and trying to empower people to engage with the process. But when they don't, and they still don't want to engage with police or the NRM, we then have to try and find sort of alternative pathways to remedy. And I'll talk through some of those later on. We have a top drawer advocacy team, a team of independent modern slavery advocates who are based in Manchester. They're incredible. They've got law degrees, social care degrees. They provide this entirely holistic support that gets people back on their feet and prevents re-trafficking. So anything from having their debts written off that were accrued in their name fraudulently when they were victims, getting them access to legal support, getting them access to accommodation, employability, English classes, whatever it takes. they'll do to make sure this person doesn't fall victim of trafficking again. Restoration, again, that falls under a lot of the work we do in advocacy. And then there's the work that Mark and his fantastic team do under Slave Free Alliance. Move on to the next slide. So this is a case study of one of the investigations that our frontline teams were involved with. It's to date the biggest UK investigation into modern slavery. I didn't work for Hope for Justice when this occurred. I was still working for the police, but yeah, Operation Fort was a West Midlands investigation. There are over 350 victims identified, and as you can see from some of the headlines and statistics, quite a high volume of profit to be made off the suffering of others. Some of the victims who first whistle blew on this case came to Hope for Justice for support and were empowered and supported through the prosecution process, and supported in order to support the prosecution and provide statements, even though they were put under a significant amount of pressure and threats from the traffickers. So incredibly brave of those guys to see that through and get a fantastic result. We're just going to show you the story of just one of those victims. So just bear with me now where we try to load a bit of a video.
Tell me why you've decided to tell your story here, to give this interview.
Czy może nam pan powiedzieć, dlaczego zdecydował się wziąć udział w tej rozmowie?
Niech się świat dowie, że żyjemy w XXI wieku, a mimo to jest takie coś, że ludzie są dalej niewolnikami. Dalej są traktowani jak zwierzęta, jak coś, na czym można zarobić i zbić majątek.
People need to know that in the 21st century, people can be used for money and treated like animals. That story needs to be told.
Czasami się zdarza, czasami nerwy puszczają, czasami ściany.
Sometimes I do think about it. Sometimes my nerves get the better of me.
Czasami
I tend to break things and I'm really nervous.
Terapię psychologiczną.
Lew, za przeproszeniem.
Honestly, it was appalling. It was worse than any living conditions.
Na podłogach.
It's like where animals live. We slept on mattresses that were possibly dragged from the street, and just like that on the floor. We used our own clothing for cover and to keep warm. There was no hot water. We had to boil water in a kettle to clean ourselves and wash our clothes. It was appalling.
Nie chciałbym do tego wracać, bo jest bardzo ciężko, żeby wspominać, co się działo, i chciałbym to zapomnieć, ale jest bardzo mi ciężko w tym.
It's very hard for me. I really don't want to talk about it and think about it anymore. It's too hard.
You're on mute, Paul.
You're on mute, Paul.
It got me again. Yeah, so quite poignant stuff. We talk about the hypothetical face of slavery here in the UK and the different forms it comes in and the impact it has on individuals. I think it's really important to remember that we are dealing with individuals. We're dealing with people's lives here, and whatever advice we can give you around appropriate escalation processes, appropriate human rights due diligence processes, or remediation, these people's lives, and if they've made a concerning disclosure to you around modern slavery, they are trusting you with the most shameful thing they've ever done, and we should treat that responsibility with the gravity that it deserves, I think. So I'm just going to hand over to Mark, who's going to talk a little bit more about Slave Free Alliance.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And Slave Free Alliance was actually born off the back of Operation Fort. We are a business. We're 100% owned by Hope for Justice, and the profits that we make go back to Hope for Justice. And we were born out of Operation Fort because lots of businesses were implicated in Operation Fort, lots of big legitimate businesses who were non-complicit. And when they got caught out, they were pretty horrified that they'd been caught out and started to approach Hope for Justice for help. You know, we want to raise awareness of this issue, and more importantly, we want to protect ourselves. And that's really what we do now. We help businesses and organizations of all sizes reduce their risk, both within their own operations and their supply chains. And we do that through a multidiscipline team. We've got former police officers, we've got trainers, we've got supply chain experts, and we have full access to the Hope for Justice team as well. And we do provide that third-party expert review and support in partnerships with businesses. And I am going to race through this, so apologies. One of the ways we do that is through our membership scheme. So businesses join Slavery Alliance, they're joining a commitment. But this isn't just a badge, it's not just a badge of honor. As part of the membership scheme, you do get direct access to our experts who will give you bespoke time and bespoke advice based on your businesses. And one of the best things is the way we work with business, we get to see lots of good practice and lots of not so good practice, and we can take those learnings and share them amongst the membership as well. So we've got members across a host of business sectors, from tiny businesses up to 8 of the FTSE 100 company businesses. And what I'll do is just share with you some of the sort of learnings that we see. So it's really important that businesses can identify and support victims of modern slavery. You know, Justine's already talked about how prevention is better than cure, about having policies, processes, effective due diligence, but then also check to see that's being practically applied in all areas of your business. Do a bit of a dip sample, because if everyone's sat in head office thinking we've got a great policy, but none of your sites are actually following that policy, that's an area of weakness as well. So do some dip sampling. Spot the signs we've already touched on, but more sort of a term that's being phrased now is spot the absence of normal. So if you just feel something isn't quite right, you know, maybe something isn't, and it's worth further investigating. And those two, we've found that businesses are getting much better at that. They're getting the policies in place. More work can be done in checking the practical application of it. Spot the signs trainings being rolled out. But these next three things then are the bits that could be improved. So first of all, how do you report a case? If someone spots it, how is that going to be reported? Then how's it going to be escalated within your organization so that the correct action is taking place? And then most importantly, how are you going to help and support and remediate sort of those victims? So just got a couple of questions. So if you just go on to a sort of poll, please. So just really asking, is your sort of business and organization, does it have a clear policies in place and procedures in place to report potential victims? Do you have policies in place for escalation if once a report has been made? And then there's a final sort of question at the end. Do you have a sort of policy or procedure in place for remediation of victims? And, you know, be honest, we can't see who answers what here. So is it yes, no, or maybe you're not sure? Okay, so the answers are sort of pretty even sort of across the board, really, which is what we're generally seeing is that lots of people have got more sort of procedures in place for reporting, less so in escalation, and then not a lot of businesses have got any sort of plan or process in place for remediation. So thank you for that. And then we've got our next poll, please. This is about reporting. So, you know, imagine you're on a site or in a factory or wherever it may be, and you spot a victim of modern slavery or spot the signs. How would you report that? So if you wouldn't mind reporting that, please. Okay, so again, a sort of pretty even sort of spread against your line manager and internal team or whistleblowing line. And you know, all of those are potentially sort of valid reporting mechanisms. That's the key thing. The main thing is just ensure that it's pretty clear within your business and organization that looks at it. We've been in businesses where, depending on what we look at, there's a different reporting line suggested. So we'd always suggest make sure there's consistency, make sure there's one route in, and make sure that's understood right across the organization. Make sure, you know, if it's a whistleblowing or speak up line or any other sort of grievance mechanism, that modern slavery is explicitly called out, or any labour exploitation is explicitly called out as a sort of valid reason for using that grievance mechanism. Sometimes it can be a bit missed, and we don't want people wondering, do I call this or not? Also explain to people what happens once a report is made. There's a lot of, you know, people are a little bit worried that if I make this report, what happens with it next? How's it going to be handled? And then reassure people that if they make a report and it turns out not to be a problem, that as long as it was a genuine sort of concern, there won't be any sort of repercussions as a result of that. And we've already touched on call 999 if a person's in immediate danger and the other areas. So that's sort of reporting done. Just in terms of escalating, this is sort of really important. So when you get that call, what's going to happen? How is your business going to respond? And we've said sort of split this into 3 stages, which is prepare, involve the right people, and act quickly and consider carefully. And really knowing how you're going to respond is really important. You do not want to be sort of making this up as you go along at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, you know, before a bank holiday, because people will get it wrong. So develop that escalation process. Develop it with various what-if scenarios. What if it is sort of Friday at 5 o'clock? What if it's in the middle of the night? You know, lots of what if it comes from the press? What if it comes from this area? So loads of what-if scenarios to consider. Plan for the worst case possible scenario. Expect it. It will happen. So it could be in the middle of the night. People could be on holiday. Or, you know, you might get the case of which we had recently where a business we worked with spotted it, involved us, called the police officer said, oh, don't worry, we've got a modern slavery team, but they're all not due on shift for the next 48 hours. I'll leave a note with them and they'll be in touch in 48 hours. Luckily, we managed to sort of resolve that. Then train the people on policy and process, and also identify the partners, and there's been plenty of partners sort of discussed today. Involve the right people, and this really does need to be a multifunctional response. Normally it might be operations, it might be HR, legal, communications, and get it up to board level straight away. A board's going to want to know if this is going to it's impacting their business. Also have some sort of backup and contingency, people off sick, people on holiday, train a few people up to take on these roles, and again make sure they're all comfortable with the process. And then act quickly and consider carefully. So number 1 has got to be sort of that victim, you know, and it might just be one victim, but there might be potentially others as well. Consider your internal business considerations. So, you know, this can be, how are you going to tell staff that have worked with these people to what messages are you going to put out to customers or to PR department? And then also record actions and decisions for any future reviews. And you should certainly have a post-incident review anyway, but you may be asked in future, why did you take that action at the time? So keep a log of, you know, what happened when and why a decision was made. And Paul will take you through some real life experiences of how he's dealt with escalation.
Thanks, Mark. So yeah, Mark's just given you that 5 p.m. on a Friday afternoon example. The last 3 years of my life have been spent dealing with 5 p.m. on a Friday night examples, and a lot of great work by a lot of passionate people within business to help people. But it's upsetting that in the 21st century, 5 years after the Modern Slavery Act was published, we're still relying on passionate individuals, and that there is this postcode lottery of care pathways for victims. So depending on where you are in the country, what day of the week it is, what time of the day it is, the level of care that that particular person can receive it just varies massively. So the example we're giving, that photo in the top right hand corner is an area of Romania called Mageni. It's quite rural, quite impoverished, but then if you drive a little bit further up the road, you get to see some garish and tacky mansions that are being built out there, that the Romanian mafia families are building off the back of the suffering and hard work of their victims. So this one particular case involves a chicken factory in Suffolk. We had a call at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon with one particular employee who made some concerning disclosures around the amount of rent that he was paying, the fact that he had to pay to open a bank account, and the fact that he doesn't get to go out much at the weekends and spend his wages because he only seems to have £20 left over after he's paid all his bills. So first thing we did in that instance, we made a quick assessment is it safe to speak to this person? If so, where? Can we find an appropriate place to speak to this person that isn't going to increase their jeopardy, put them in any unnecessary risk, and cause any unnecessary complications for them? So we identified that we went to the factory, we identified a safe place within the HR department, and we quickly did some research on the computer systems as well. We looked for the sort of things that Justine's just quite rightly talked about. Does this person share an address, a phone number, a bank account, or next of kin details with any other workers? We soon identified that a Romanian mafia family had taken over an entire block of flats in Ipswich and were renting out the entire block to workers in this one particular factory. So it went from 1 victim to 90 in about half an hour. Thankfully, many of the victims did want to engage with the GLAA. 2 fantastic GLAA investigators attended the site, Matt and Adi. They were fantastic. However, there were some that didn't. They didn't want to engage with the process at all. The NRM was explained to them as robustly as it could have been. You know, you've got options of safe house, outreach, or you can decline it altogether, or there's repatriation, and you have to respect the wishes of every individual. Just because you found 8 victims in the same scenario doesn't mean all 8 want to take the same path to remedy. So you have to respect their individual wishes. So for those that declined the referral, we quickly found that there was no escalation process within the client, within the chicken company, and there was no escalation or remediation process there. So we had to pretty much make it up as we were going, which is just what Mark said is the last thing you want to be doing at 5 o'clock on a Friday night. So we had some pretty strong immediate safeguarding concerns for these individuals. We didn't want to send them back home, knowing what we knew about the nature of their relationship with their traffickers. So we paid to put them in a hotel for the weekend until we could source alternative accommodation. We bought them food parcels, clothing, toiletries. They asked for cigarettes and alcohol. Initially, this was seen as a little bit of a step too far, but you have to be prepared for the fact that some of these people may have substance dependency issues. You know, if you're living in this kind of situation, it might be the only coping mechanism you've got is access to alcohol or cigarettes. So we placed some of them in a hotel. We engaged with some large-scale recruiters, so supermarkets, retailers, and we managed to find alternative employment for them, which was fantastic. And then we also managed to bargain with some really good, reputable landlords. We got them into some purpose-built professional HMOs and paid for their first 2 weeks' rent until they could start earning again. Those that wanted repatriation back home, we paid for their flights, and we notified the next of kin when they would be arriving. We also notified domestic sort of NGOs working in their domestic country who could help with counselling and any support they needed going forward. We then also made referrals through to Hope for Justice for these guys to receive that sort of counselling and aftercare and support. Even though they'd not all gone into the NRM, Hope for Justice will still help them with that aftercare and that support. So what started off as 1 victim on a Friday afternoon over the course of the weekend snowballed to around 90. Suffolk Police, Norfolk Police, Cambridgeshire Police and the GLAA worked together on an investigation, got it to the point where CPS were going to make a charging decision. I think they went for unlicensed gangmastering offences rather than modern slavery offences, which was unfortunate given the nature of the abuse, but it's seen as a more guaranteed sort of chance of prosecution, which is upsetting. And there was a very low level of victim engagement, which you do kind of need to prepare yourselves for. That headline there in red is a Romanian headline. One of the people involved in this investigation was beaten to death by the Romanian mafia because he saw this as a business opportunity. He saw that this family had been arrested. There's a void to fill here, so I will traffic some people from Romania. I will fill this void. And sadly, that gentleman was beaten to death by the mafia family. So we're not always dealing with organised crime. This is the upper echelons of that. Sometimes it's as simple as we've had a husband and wife who were trafficking people and renting out their spare room to them, but they were all crammed in, mattresses on the floor, and there were about 6 of them in a box room. So it can be anything from a standalone opportunist right the way through to pretty serious organised crime gangs that are perpetrating this kind of criminality.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And Paul's touched on there both sort of escalation and remediation, but just for some people might wonder what is remediation, and there's lots of definitions out there. Some way too complex for sort of my simple mind, but this is the one that I like. Is remediation is the process of ending situations of forced labour and as far as possible correcting the harms experienced by the victims. And it's really important because we want to help those victims, and it's unfortunately a fact of life that victims are often at risk of being re-exploited if they don't sort of get the right support. But the other area is we want to try and prosecute these traffickers, organised criminals or criminals. If we just take and rescue the victims, that's great, but it's only like cutting the tail off the snake. We want to cut the head off the snake and sort of take that crime gang down, and also sort of make it an act of deterrence that you will go to prison if you do this. Paul, I think you've covered most of this. In the interest of time, shall we just sort of skip on? I think you've touched on emergency remediation and sort of non-immediate.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So remediation in practice, again, this has sort of been touched upon, but there are multiple individual and complex needs when dealing with what we'd like to call survivors of slavery rather than victims. And I think it's important when you're first sat down and you're taking those first disclosures from an individual is to note the difference between the immediate needs of the individual and the long-term, more physiological and psychological needs. So in the first instance, are there any physical needs? So we had an investigation in Derby, in a factory in Derby, where an individual disclosed that he hadn't been fed for 14 days. At the point where we identified him, he was identified purely owing to the fact that demand for labour at the factory declined. People were turned away and weren't asked to come in for shifts, but he was still showing up every day and hanging around at the gates for 8 hours a day. We found out the reasons for this was that if he didn't pick up a shift, his traffickers would beat him. So he was pretending to come to work still, and then he would just get one beating a week rather than one a day. He grew up in an orphanage in Slovakia, and when he turned 18, they made him homeless, and he was pretty easy prey for someone that wanted to bring him to the UK and put him to work. He had a pretty severe learning disability, and his traffickers convinced him that they were his adopted family. So he didn't want to get them into any trouble. This is the kind of sort of exploitation and manipulation and coercion we're dealing with. First thing we needed to do was get some food down this poor guy, get him fed, make sure he's okay, try to explain the ramifications of what's happened to him in really simple terms. Education is the most powerful preventative tool. I think Christine touched upon that quite aptly earlier. But when the worst has already happened, again, she also said, people don't identify as victims. This young boy did not identify as a victim, but trying to get him to explain to him the gravity of what's happened to him, the seriousness and what his actual rights are, was our first sort of barrier, really. We had him checked over for any immediate medical needs. Despite being pretty malnourished, he was okay on that front. And then luckily he went with members of Derbyshire Police into an NRM safe house. But businesses now are doing more and more, and Mark's team are working really closely with some really good examples, really great businesses that want to do more when it comes to remediation. There's some great examples of where people want to ensure that there's a job there for somebody. So whether they go into the NRM or whether they don't, can we guarantee these people long-term employment no matter where they end up in the country? Can we pay for some accommodation just to get them back on their feet? Can we give them food parcels, a mobile phone, whatever these people need? Businesses are doing more and more now to try and ensure that risk of re-trafficking is reduced. So there's some great examples there. There's examples of where our advocacy team support them with legal support, debt advice, financial remediation, trauma-informed counselling. But I think it's important as a business to try and identify, look, this will impact us. How severely will it impact us? Because the minute you start to make those kinds of assessments, you can even start to budget for it. You can even say, this is a fund, and from this fund, we will pay for remediation for any victims we identify in our supply chains. And that's what businesses are trying to do more and more these days. So we're currently in the process of trying to write a escalation process that can be applied to businesses within various at-risk sectors, and couple that with some strong NRM advice and some strong remediation advice. But businesses are already coming to us and asking, how do we prepare for this? How do we do more? Because what we don't want is to do our due diligence, identify a victim, and then realise that they end up in a way worse situation, because then all those lies that the traffickers have told become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So remediation is the key to prevent re-trafficking. So it can be something so practical and so simple, and to your business really is not a great deal of money when we're talking about the kinds of things that could help get someone back on their feet. So I won't labour the point too much, but there's some great examples being worked on currently. So if anyone does want any more details on appropriate escalation and remediation processes, feel free to contact us outside of this forum.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. And with that, we'll just leave everyone with our contact details.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. In true event, we are so overrunning. It's ridiculous, but I think it's been really, really important that we've heard from you guys, because I think the work that you do, the Gangmasters Labour Abuse Authority, the stuff that Justine is doing is all really, really important. What I'm going to do is hand over now to Daniel for one last presentation, and I'll ask if any of the speakers are okay to help us do the questions and record those. So if you are dropping off because you're disappearing, then you should be able to do the questions and answer session afterwards. If we are struggling with time, what we'll do is we'll download all of the questions offline and then get all the attendees to answer them, circulate it around. So bear with me, I am literally trying to find different ways of doing this. But in the need of expediency, and I know, Daniel, you've got a meeting, so I'm going to hand over to you now.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you all for having me. So I'm Daniel Ose. I'm the Skills Employment and Education Lead at SES Railways, looking after Area Central. And this is an initiative that has been put together with my colleague, Kim Armstead, who's also on a call. So we're just going to touch on we're going to try to whiz through as quickly as possible on what SES Railways is doing to support survivors of modern slavery. Okay, so SES Railways, we are a joint venture which consists of Skanska, Costain and Strabag, and we are one of the main works civils contractors that's delivering the work in the southern section between London and Birmingham on the HS2 contract. So as a part of Empowering Communities, and just to give a bit of perspective, Empowering Communities is a social legacy program which consists of the tier 1 contractors delivering the HS2 works. So that's got Arab, Costain, Maestro Gardos, BBVS, Skanska, Strabag and HS2 as our sponsor. So as a part of that, we've looked at a multitude of working streams, and one that popped out for us was survivors of modern slavery. So we've partnered with City Hearts on the Bright Future initiative, and this is about creating employment opportunities for survivors of modern slavery. So this was an initiative that was put together by Co-op, and it's about initially offering work placements that can lead to non-competitive interviews and ultimately sustainable employment. So as a part of our works, it's really important that we focus on the communities that our works impact, and that we can also remove barriers to employment and support those that are most vulnerable in our societies get employment opportunities and placements. So these are some of the core authorities that our HS2 line of route goes through. So Kensington and Chelsea, Hammersmith and Fulham, Westminster, Ealing, Brent, Camden and Hillingdon. So it's really important for us that our legacy is more than just building a railway, but we're also focused on the communities that our works impact. So with this being said, we have a few core areas that we put our efforts towards, and these are apprenticeships, so creating new and existing, supporting worklessness, so those that have been previously unemployed and workless graduates, our facilitation of school engagement through college and school events, our placements, professional attainment and support for the National College of Advanced Transport and Infrastructure. So as a sort of business, we've looked at some priority groups that we want to work with that are really, while it's important that we build a railway and we have the right skill sets, it's really important that even so more now that we are working with those that are furthest from the labour market. So we've partnered with a host of charities that support homeless, workless, care leavers and ex-offenders. But more recently, we started conversations with City Hearts in regards to supporting the Bright Future programme, which I'll touch on now. So myself and my colleague Kim, we sat together with Bright Futures and Co-op to understand as an employer how we can support this initiative. And fundamentally, it's about making sure that we put our candidates at the heart of the process, and that, of course, we're dealing with individuals that have dealt with aspects of exploitation, that we can offer paid placements to our candidates and offer our non-competitive interviews as part of the process, and ultimately help to sustain employment for these individuals. So as a part of that conversation, we looked at sort of what we can achieve annually, and 5 candidates per year was what was highlighted as sort of targets. As part of the process, it's about treating the candidate in the same way as we would for other colleagues, and that's on all factors and to do with legal and internal procedures, and utilising the national matching system, which is overseen by City Hearts, to match candidates to employment opportunities. So we put together a focus group which consisted of Alison Snowden and Kirsty Harts from Co-op and City Hearts, and we looked internally at our own sort of resources, key colleagues that can facilitate and support this initiative. So myself and Kim, who leads this from Empowering Communities, who you can see in the top right corner of the screen. My other colleague, Rory O'Callaghan, who helped us in terms of identifying any opportunities across our supply chain, now or later down, and our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Advisor, Laura Roche. As a part of this and some of the conversations that we had, it was imperative that we also involved our labour desk. So Danny Sullivan, McGinley and VGC, who form a consortium. This was through conversations that we had about some of the opportunities that individuals will be looking for. And it was really important for us to bring in our labour desk to sort of facilitate creating these openings and placement opportunities. But not only placements, but making sure that we can proceed into guaranteed interviewed and job opportunities hereafter. So through our conversations, we were able to identify that the support that City Hearts provide us is that the candidates have right to work. Opportunities that we provide will be sustainable, so that we will look at locations that are commutable and suited to candidates. All candidates having bank accounts, and that they are at a stage in their recovery where they can thrive in a workplace. These are really important factors. Some of the challenges that we discussed were that candidates need to be directly employed. So that's even within our supply chain or labour desk, so that all of our partners that are involved, whoever's taken on such an individual, needs to also be signed up with the National Matching Service and sign up to the Charter. Candidates' competency level. So candidates that we're supporting, some of them might have the right skill sets and proficiencies, but these aren't always recognised as UK standards. So this sparks some conversations in terms of site tickets and qualifications and what we can do in terms of pre-employment to support individuals into sustainable employment. And also candidates' level of speaking in terms of English. So for a health and safety perspective, it was really important that candidates that we support are tapped into either ESOL classes, or they have basic proficiency in understanding English as a standard. So as a part of the process, when we identify candidates, City Hearts review the employment opportunities that we provide, and they propose candidates that match the opportunities. Where individuals have been identified, they visit the site and brief line managers and HR managers about the process. This stage is really important about pre-employment and pre-placement meetings to make sure that from both perspectives, an individual and a manager is comfortable with proceeding. And at this stage, an individual can decide that it might not be the right placement, or it might be another opportunity that might be more suited. And if all is well at this stage, candidates and businesses arrange a 28-day paid placement, which begins at that stage. So for us, the next steps are, we actually have training today, which we are involving all of our labour desk and line managers, and that will be delivered from Hestia, so one of our partner charities, and they will be delivering training to our line managers that will be ultimately recruiting these individuals and sort of giving a perspective on how to spot the signs, the importance of anonymity, and how to integrate survivors of modern slavery into the workforce. Hereafter, we'll be signing up as a business partner. So we've committed in the first instance to look at free placement opportunities within our labour desk. So between VGC, Danny Sullivan and McGinley Group, we were looking to start with 3 individuals, support them into their employment, and hopefully get sustainable employment opportunities off the back of a placement. Utilising the national matching system, which looks at the location, English competency and interest to make sure we are matching individuals to jobs that they can sustain. And another key aspect, of course, with infrastructure and construction, to be able to do most things on site, you do require a CSCS card. So that's something that we have come together with our labour desk and have agreed to facilitate and support any payment that is required to make sure that individuals not only are able to partake in placements, but they are able to sustain opportunities hereafter. And where individuals need support in terms of mentoring or buddying, we've looked at potentially matching people with individuals that speak the same language on site, etc. But this is where we're at the moment. This is the quickest run through I've ever done, but this is where we're at in terms of SCS Railways. So thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Daniel, that was absolutely brilliant. And massive apologies to you, because I think actually it's a really, really good example of the tail end of stuff around what can happen when you need to give a victim that ultimate support, i.e. reintroducing them into employment. And I think there's definitely an opportunity for us to maybe catch up with you guys and do some more promo stuff you're doing in the school. It'd be brilliant if we could do that with you. That would be great, and I'll catch up with that. I am also very, very conscious of the fact that we seem not quite lost 50% of the people on the call, but a reasonable number. So what I'm actually going to suggest we do is I want to do a massive, massive, massive thank you to all our presenters. You've got so much knowledge that you shared, and I've seen with all the chats and the comments that it's been very, very well appreciated. There's been a lot of chat around what resources to share, so I've made a big list of all the different types of resources, and we will be sharing this video. But what I'm also going to do is go through all the chats offline and just liaise with you all as presenters, if that's okay, just to see if we can get some combined responses that we can send out as part of the sort of pack with the videos that are going on. So for those of you who are still here, thank you for sticking with us. Can you complete the feedback form? But we will send that link through. Note to self, might need to give everybody about another hour if we're going to do this session again. But it has been really, really useful. So from my perspective, massive thank you to Justine. Thank you to Frank. Thank you to Mark and Paul. I could listen to you all for days in terms of the things that you're doing. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate you've got a meeting to disappear to, and Kim for the face. And we will be in touch with you soon to share some more of that stuff around. I will also be sending some stuff around about People Matter Charter. I will always do. Get your people strategies right. So, start thinking about committing to that. We will help you with more of these sessions. So keep feeding back. And in which case, 10-minute overrun, but thank you. Thank you to everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll be in touch with loads of resources, loads of answers to your questions. And thanks for sticking with us.
Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.